Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, a podcast all about growing your network and building your brand through traditional and digital networking techniques. I'm Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. I've been strengthening brands through PR for over 35 years, and now I'm celebrating the success of executives, influencers, business owners, and entrepreneurs from all around the world, all of whom have cultivated their brands and broadened their networks through traditional and digital networking methods. Each week, I interview one of these interesting and influential individuals and provide an opportunity for you, the PR Maven Nation, to gain insights from their strategies and stories. So stay tuned for this week's episode, and thanks for listening. This is episode number 139, presented by Marshall Communications, creator of the 65-step Marshall Plan strategic process. And for those of you who are new to the show, I'm Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. I want to welcome you. And with me today is this week's guest, Greg Glynn, who's producer for the PR Maven podcast and account supervisor at Marshall Communications. Greg, welcome to the PR Maven podcast.
Oh, thank you very much, Nancy. This is so exciting today to be on StreamYard, and I know that we're both very excited about what's ahead for the podcast.
Yeah, well, I'm excited, but I'm also a little nervous because it's like this is the first time we've done it by video. You know, previously I've been able to like kind of hide behind the microphone without it. Like I had to get my hair done and everything.
Yeah.
So
No,
I'm going to share Greg's bio for you now. Greg is the perfect guest for today's episode because we have officially transitioned to StreamYard for broadcasting the podcast. And this means in addition to being available on your favorite podcast player, the PR Maven podcast is now also available on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Like, I just love social media because I'm just so social, and now I can socialize everywhere. I can socialize it in person, and I can socialize over the computer, and it's just like the greatest thing. So Greg's broadcasting background and experience helped launch the podcast back in 2018. And I have to tell you, like, 2018 is before 2019, which is what COVID is named for, right? So it seems to be a little bit like, it's like pre-COVID. Instead of having BC, we're gonna have peace pre-COVID, which seems like ancient times. But Greg has helped take the podcast to the next level, and he has his broadcasting degree from Quinnipiac University in Hamden, Connecticut, and he was the play-by-play voice of the Portland Pirates hockey team from 2004 to 2009. He earned his APR, which is accreditation in public relations, from the Public Relations Society of America in 2016. And he has been with Marshall Communications for 12 years, which I also can't believe. Like, how could that be possible?
Yeah.
I should also mention that we're coming up on officially the 30th anniversary of Marshall Communications on April 1st of 2021, which is like, I mean, well, I did start Marshall Communications when I was 6 months old. So, anyway, so we're going to talk today about podcasting and Marshall Communications' 30th anniversary. So, Greg, today we are video streaming the podcast on StreamYard. As a producer for the PR Maven podcast, can you talk about this next step and the work that has gone into it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been fun. You have to really want to embrace a challenge to be able to take the podcast to the next level, meaning going to video. And you know me, I've always been a big fan of video. So it was right up my alley to be able to help you do this. You had the vision for it, and we wanted to do it. So just like when you wanted to start the podcast originally, and I didn't know much about how, I mean, obviously we knew a lot about podcasting, but we had no idea where to start.
Or how complicated it was.
Or how complicated.
It's like, I think
might have been a good thing.
That's easy. You just record it, It's a little more complicated than that.
Yeah, and but just like we did back then in 2018, we figured it out, and we also figured this out for StreamYard. This, I think, it would have been amazing to see what would have happened, and for people that are going to try to just go from no podcasting on audio to trying to go directly to StreamYard. That'll be an interesting transition for people if they try to make it, because it's hard to just do a podcast in general. So I'm glad in a way we crawled before we walked, and now we're walking before we run, rather than go from crawling to running.
I'm not a very good runner, so I'm not sure. I maybe if I could do a swimming podcast.
There you go. But I think that's a one thing is video. It makes it a lot more complicated, and we're going to start to see that, and we do see it a lot now also with people that are producing their own videos, and they're realizing, wow, the time that goes into producing a video, whether you're worried about lighting, whether you're worried about the audio, whether you're worried about dogs barking, there are so many factors that go into video that are going to really be an important part of making a successful podcast.
I agree. Well, and then there's all the other steps that we take to share it through social. And then we do the flash briefing, which is available on Alexa. So, for those of our people in our audience that have an Alexa, they should enable the skill of the PR Maven podcast.
Yeah. And I think too, a lot of people don't understand what goes into like the show rundown. Like we have 3 pages of notes that tell you how to prepare. So when you have a guest on the show, you've got a bio in front of you. We've already pre-produced a lot of the content. We've done the research on the guest. We've created questions for the guest, and all that's on a document that also goes into a whole nother system we have of scheduling guests. So this isn't just a let's have somebody on the podcast and do it today type of thing. This takes weeks of planning, and then it will take time to produce the post-podcast elements, which now are going to be a lot faster because we are using StreamYard, and this will be live just like we are now. So this will be able to be replayed in real time, which is really exciting. There won't be much editing, and that's exciting, but I can see why you'd be nervous as well.
Yeah, right. I don't want to have Nancy's bloopers. So, Greg, according to Infinite Dial, the growth of podcasting is soaring, and there are now 80 million weekly podcast listeners. Why do you think podcasting has really taken off?
I think podcasting has really taken off because we are all around so much content these days. And whether you watch the news or whether you read a book and you're interested in a certain topic or you have a certain hobby, you can't get every little inch of your hobby, information for your hobby or your passion in life from the news. They're producing it for you. But when you go and you try to read a book, now you're getting closer to your hobby. If you want to read about, golf, for me, for example, I can read Golf Magazine, which is great. But that, again, still is not actually as deep as I want to go. So if I want to learn about how to chip the ball out of the rough from, US Open thick lie, that's hard to get in a magazine. I can't tell them what I want to read about. But if I want to listen to a podcast about golf and then I can submit a question or I can engage with someone who's a very good chipper like Phil Mickelson and he's going to be on an episode, then I would want to listen to that episode because now they've actually hit that exact thing that I'm looking for. And so I think that's something that podcasting does that people can't get anywhere else. So when they are so passionate about a topic, they come to a podcast that is about that topic. And that's why I also think podcasting is so good, is because people will develop relationships with people that are passionate about the same things they are, which is why I think this podcast about public relations, marketing, and personal branding is so important for you and our listeners and now our viewers to be able to engage with you because you're just as passionate as they are because that's why they're here.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about chipping, because I did take quite a few golf lessons, and I do know you use your pitching wedge, and you kind of hold it forward, and you kind of come down on it. You scoop it up. I do remember that from my golf lessons at the Sugarloaf Golf Club.
Perfect. See?
Although I'm not really patient enough for golf. You have to be really patient to be a good golfer.
A lot of deep breathing, a lot of goose frabas.
Yeah. Greg and I have a little joke because my son Jamie, from the movie Anger Management, there's an expression which is goose fraba. And that's like when you need to take a deep breath and blow out all your stress. So my son knows me well enough. He can tell just by how I hold my jaw whether I'm stressed or not. And he'll look at me and go, goose fraba. Greg's learned that now too. So podcasting is a great media platform for PR professionals. Can you talk about how pitching a podcast is similar or different from pitching a TV show or a radio show?
Yeah, I think this is really important for people that are out there that are listening from a PR perspective. So instead of maybe being able to get away with watching the Today Show and saying, oh, it'd be great if Savannah could do a story about this, or I know that, there's a producer that's looking to book segments. It takes a little less effort to be able to know, because that's national news. So everybody knows who Savannah is, right? Well, if you're going to pitch a podcast, you've got to actually, I think, listen to the podcast at least one episode, because you have to have a feel for the person's personality, the guests that they typically have on. I was, for example, pitching cycling podcasts for the Trek Across Maine. And there's a lot of cycling podcasts, but there are cycling podcasts that are about like racing cycling, and that is a totally different topic. They're not going to have somebody on that has been a volunteer for the Trek Across Maine for 35 years and is, passionately raising money, because that's not what that podcast is about. Now, there's, a podcast called 18 Summers Podcast, which is about pretty much a lot of outdoorsy things and people that are passionate about the outdoors and helping get other people outdoors. So that actually makes much more of a fit in some ways than a true cycling podcast. So you have to know who the host is, and you have to know their personality and what they're going to be receptive to and the content that they talk about. So you can't look at one episode and go, oh, okay, that's perfect. You really need to look at the other episodes and the type of content that they're putting out there before you make that pitch. And the other thing, I do think it's probably going to be easier to pitch a podcast in the future because podcast hosts are a little bit more transparent than trying to get in touch with someone on the national news and a national producer. That's really hard, as you and I well know. But the idea is that if you can actually hit your target audience. So do I need a story on the national news or the Today Show, for example, about the Trek Across Maine? It'd be great to have, obviously. But could I reach a target audience that I might not hit with the Today Show by hitting a good cycling podcast of people that are passionate about raising money and participating in annual cycling events? That's my bread and butter, not necessarily the people that are watching the morning national news.
Yeah, that's why we call it the targeted audience. I mean, and one of the things that we do in our Marshall Plan process is we help our clients to create these targeted avatars, which are like personas, composite personalities of exactly the people that they're trying to reach so that they can really target them. And the example you gave was perfect. That cycling podcast will reach that targeted avatar, whereas the Today Show, it might reach some of those avatars, but you're also reaching a lot of other people who might not even care.
Get on a bike.
I hate to tell our clients at the Trek Across Maine that there are people that might not care about it, but that's just the reality of it.
And maybe it's also to not get on a bike, but the other thing too, it's about raising awareness. So we're always trying to raise awareness, and you have to do it in the right way. And you got to be strategic about it, how much time you spend in one area versus another. And that's why I love podcast pitching, is because you can hit that target audience and you can get there a lot faster and a lot easier. So it's a big advantage for PR professionals.
That's right. Yeah, there's all kinds of advantages. So we're going to continue to hear more from Greg, but now I just want to remind you about free access to my latest book, which is entitled Grow Your Audience, Grow Your Brand. And if you go to prmaven.com/giveaway, you can actually download a free copy of my book. And that's a book that I wrote about a year ago at the outset of COVID-19, because I had a lot of spare time on my hands at that time. I don't anymore. I don't know what happened, but it was pretty quiet there for a few months. So we'll be back with more from Greg Glynn in just a moment.
Do you want to grow your client or customer base? Perhaps increase brand awareness? Maybe tell your unique story more effectively? Of course you do. But you may be worried that you don't have enough expertise to make that happen. Well, no worries, PR Maven Nation. Let the PR Maven herself, Nancy Marshall, show you how easy it is to get your message across effectively using a powerful yet simple tool, a message map. Nancy's training is often called informative and constructive, well-designed and impactful, with a perfect blend of theory and real-life experience. You will leverage Nancy's expertise to create your own message map when you register for this comprehensive online video training course, which is broken down into 4 easy-to-understand modules. Normally, this course is priced at $147, but for listeners of the PR Maven podcast, that's you, PR Maven Nation, it's only $29 when you enter the code word podcast during enrollment. It even includes a workbook and bonus content to guide you through the process. So go to prmaven.com and click on the Message Map Mastery course to enroll today. Remember, enter the word podcast during enrollment for a special discounted price of $29.
Welcome back to the PR Maven podcast. And we're talking with Greg Glynn on the podcast today. And Greg, the PR Maven podcast has won quite a few awards recently, including one from the Maine Public Relations Council. Can you talk about the awards we've received?
Yeah, absolutely. This is really exciting. I know that you and I are really proud of the podcast and what we've been able to accomplish, because so much obviously, goes into this podcast on a weekly basis. And we wouldn't be here obviously today without Emma Dimick, who's here, and also our producer today. And the work that she does and the hours that she puts in, along with all of us to get ready for it, is really incredible. And I think that it's a testament to how far we've come from 2018 to launching the podcast with a vision to obviously have it broadcast in as many places as possible. But we've come a long way. So when you think about it, we've been listed on FeedSpot's top 10 personal branding podcasts to follow, which was really cool. And then this year we won a Golden Arrow from the Maine Public Relations Council. And I think that this really is important because it's recognition of not only the time and the effort that's gone into it, but also the measurement data that we use to create this great podcast for our listeners. We also are always looking at that information, and that's allowing us to pick topics and see what we should be thinking about for our next episodes. We look to see which episodes were the most popular. And if people aren't looking at that information, then they don't know what podcast episodes were popular. So if they're picking episodes or more guests that are not popular and they're not paying attention, then that podcast isn't going to grow very quickly. So you have to be able to look at your information. It's no surprise we've had Tim Cotton on here twice because his episode was so popular. So I think that that's really been something that's really noticeable about obviously the podcast and how successful we've been. So it looks like Nancy might be having some technical difficulty. So what I'll do is I'll also talk about some of the things that make the podcast obviously successful and award-winning at this point. A lot of the things have to do with, like I said, the behind-the-scenes stuff, when you look at the show notes and the pre-production that goes into it, all of the planning. So we're talking with our guests, we're inviting the guests, and they're responding to us. We also use a system called Acuity that allows people to see what we're doing and also pick their dates for their schedule of when they want to come on. As you can imagine, trying to schedule a meeting during COVID has been tough enough virtually, but we're trying to schedule a guest on the podcast. And as a result of that, we're using a program that allows us to really cut down on a lot of time and back and forth with our guests who are also very busy. So we wanted to make it as easy as possible. So if you are a guest on our podcast, you'll find that experience very easy. It also makes it easier for us as we put people into our system. So I think that's another reason that the MPRC award was such an important thing for us because we realized that we're doing a lot of things right. And I'm excited to see what's ahead for the podcast. And I know that Nancy is really excited about what's ahead. And I think this StreamYard opportunity is also really a really cool opportunity for us. And the reason I say that is because if you think about where podcasting is headed, okay, one of the things that's interesting to note is that between audiences that are ages 12 to 34, that makes up 50% of podcast listeners. So it shows you that the demographic information on podcasting is on the lower age groups, which means these are your future listeners, and those are going to be loyal listeners. And I'm really fascinated that they've got information on 12-year-olds listening to podcasts because now they're going to grow up with podcasts. They're going to grow up with video podcast. So when there is just podcasts out there that are audio only in 10 years, people are going to be looking at them like, that's just an audio podcast. I don't want to listen to that. We're going to expect as listeners and viewers, we're going to expect a lot more out of podcasting. So I think that going video is the way to go. And it'll be really interesting to see how podcasting evolves and how hosts have to evolve, because as more and more go to video, if you are a popular podcast and you don't go to video, are you still going to be as popular? And the other thing too, I think that's definitely coming and is important to know is that podcasting is going to become even more popular, especially when they start to add more technology into automobiles, and it's going to make it a lot easier to listen or watch a podcast, of course, not while you're driving, but to be able to listen to podcasts easier.
So, Greg, yeah, I had a little problem with my technology here. I don't know what happened, but we're going to have to look into that. But thanks for continuing to talk.
No problem. That's one of my fortes.
Yes, I know. That's great. So, at Marshall Communications, we take a lot of pride in our work, not just on the podcast, but for the work we can do for our clients, like what we've done over the past 30 years. You've been with the agency for 12 years. What have been some of your favorite projects or clients?
Yeah, I think back to the early start, back in 2009, when I came to the agency and I was coming from the Portland Pirates, and we were working with the Maine Beer and Wine Distributors Association, and they had just wrapped up a Marshall Plan. And as part of that Marshall Plan, one of the things was to create a public service announcement campaign and a responsibility campaign related to the distributors and making sure that they were promoting responsible consumption of their products. And as part of that, we wanted to identify a spokesperson. And when I joined on the account, we brainstormed a lot of people. There was talk from everybody from Seth Westcott to Bob Marley and everything in between. But one of the people we identified was Olympian Julia Kluge. And she was an Augusta native that was passionate about sports and helping youth. And little did we know that we'd be reaching out to her on Facebook and finding her, and that she would become the next spokesperson for the Maine Beer and Wine Distributors. And we had her going to high schools, recording public service announcements and stuff that she hadn't really done in the past. She wanted to be more involved in her community. And we certainly did that, and then some. And she became a great ambassador for the Maine Beer and Wine Distributors Association. And, we ended up, I think, at more than 60 schools across the state. It was great for me because I enjoy traveling. I enjoy seeing the state, but I also enjoy spending time with an athlete who I can really think like, and I understand, what their training is like and kind of how their brain works, because I've worked with professional athletes for a long time. And it's a different breed, and you have to know it, and you've got to understand it because they are passionate about their sport. And when Julia's training at such and such hour, and she's got all kinds of obligations, so you have to be understanding to that and find a way to fit it in and make it work. And we did, and I was thrilled to work with her on it. That was by far and away probably I think also really impactful. You think about not only just the excitement of the sport part, because I like sports, obviously, but when you go into a school and you've got kids just jumping up and down on bleachers and the energy is just about ready to blow the roof off. And now I think about it during COVID, and I realize how fortunate we were to be able to go to high schools and go and do this. I mean, because if Julia's, talking over Zoom to a bunch of kids, 200 kids on Zoom, that's not the same thing.
Right. Yeah. That's a great story.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Well, some of our funniest moments at the agency for me, when I first started the agency 30 years ago, I actually landed Northern Outdoors Rafting Company as a client. And I remember meeting with Susie and Wayne Hockmeyer, who were the owners of Northern Outdoors at the time. I met with them at Sugarloaf probably in January of 1992. And I told them that if they'd hire my agency to do their PR, that I would become a raft guide. And so little did I know actually that I was then going to be not only launching the agency, but having a baby. So I had Craig, who's now 28. And but shortly after he was born, I actually had to hold up my promise. One thing I always say is, if you make a promise, you have to stand up and follow through. So, yeah, I left my baby child with my mom, and I went to the Kennebec River. It was in May, and the ice had just gone out. It was cold, and I had to wear a wetsuit for 7 consecutive days to become a raft guide. And I actually failed the test the first time I took it, but I went back and took the test again, and I passed, and I actually became a raft guide. So then actually, while we were doing the guide training, I had contacted Bill Green from News Center, Maine, who had his famous show at the time, Bill Green's Maine. I had asked him to come up and do a story about what's called Flip Day on the Kennebec River, and that's the day that you learn actually what to do if a raft flips over. And what Bill didn't tell me is that he's actually terrified of the water in general, and really terrified of white water, especially white water that's like that big. That's really big water. And so we flipped, and Bill went in, and he did what you're not supposed to. You're supposed to just let yourself go with the flow, and then eventually the water kind of calms down. But he tried to get over to the side, and then he was hanging on to a tree branch, which is not the right thing to do, because it's hard for you to get rescued when you're like over there on the side. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to kill Bill Green. This isn't good. This isn't good for PR.
No.
I'm going to save Bill Green. So finally, we got him to let go of the tree branch, and he floated down, and then we were able to get him back in the raft. But actually, that isn't the only time in my career that I've almost killed a famous broadcaster. There was a time when I worked at Sugarloaf when we had this idea of flying up all the meteorologists from the Boston TV stations in a private plane to Sugarloaf and have them ski for a day. And then we're going to fly them back, and they'd go on the air that night and say, hey, I just skied at Sugarloaf, and it was really great. So everything went really smoothly. I picked them up, the 3 meteorologists from the 3 major networks, brought them up. We skied. We got them in rental skis, skied. Then we got them some lunch, brought them back, put them on the little plane. they took off from the Sugarloaf Airport, but the plane was like headed right towards the Bigelow mountain range. Like it looked like it was going to literally fly into the mountain range. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to kill all the weathermen from Boston. This is not good for PR. I'm like, oh, I was like about to die. But little did I know that the flight path is that you go towards the Bigelow Range and then you hang left and then you circle around. So I'm so relieved.
Yeah.
So
I can.
those are some of the moments from my career that are memorable. Another memorable moment is that shortly after starting the agency, as things started getting really busy, because Sugarloaf was a client in Northern Outdoors, the Victory Chimes Windjammer, and then we had the Moosehead Lake Chamber of Commerce for their Moose Mania event. So I had quite a few clients and I needed help. And there was a woman named Charlene Schwalbenberg, whose husband was the general manager of the Sugarloaf Hotel. And I said, hey, Charlene, can you come work for me part-time? I really need some help. And she's like, no, Nancy, we're moving away. But I have another friend named Charlene. You should talk to Charlene Williams. And she's like, she makes lunch in the bubble cupper, like the lunchroom for the little kids program. So like I go over and find this Charlene Williams and she's like making macaroni and cheese for the kids. And I'm like, hey, I've heard you might be willing to help me. And she's like, she wasn't really that interested. I'm like, so I kind of kept talking. I said, Charlene Schwalbenberg, your friend said you would be good. So I kept after Charlene Williams. Finally, she agreed to work for me part-time. And then the rest is history. Like I kept wearing her down. And now she's actually president of the agency and she's been with me now for, I think, 26 years. So it's pretty remarkable because she really didn't have public relations experience, but she had a natural gift for it. And, right. She handles all our work with the State of Maine Tourism Office. So that's quite a meteoric rise from macaroni and cheese maker to president of Maine's largest PR agency.
I was going to say that's pretty good. Now, I will say we've obviously become, as you said, Maine's largest, probably one of the obviously most notable in New England, and really with our international, contacts as well. We get a lot of requests that we sometimes do or don't work with, right? And one my kind of humorous, if you will, that we went through was talking with Turdy Works at the time when we worked with them. That was a very eye-opening experience when they had their own television show and they were looking for a marketing plan. And the show and the owners, they Googled information to find information on a Maine PR firm and marketing, and they found us. And we were part of that show, and I actually had to go to their house, which was their factory, and
you might as well tell what they make.
Yeah, so they make moose turds. They dry moose turds, and
they don't make the moose turds. The moose make the moose.
Well, the moose make the moose turds, but they make they
tchotchkes out of moose turds from the Maine woods.
Yes, and when she told me about the number 2 pencil, I was like, that is pretty funny.
And then they have clocks where they have 1 turdy, 2 turdy.
2 turdy, yeah. And I mean, like when you're hearing this stuff, you're like, is this real? And it is real. So
yeah, if you Google search turdy, it's TIRDY works.com.
Yeah.
And it's a couple of women from Maine who, like, you talk about characters from Maine. They're characters, like the dictionary next to characters from Maine are these 2 women.
Yeah. And so, that was a really fun experience to be part of a television show. I mean, that was interesting. So,
well, we've had a lot of fun. We've worked really hard. Even just today, we worked really hard. I mean, Greg was at the Augusta, Maine Police Department this morning shooting video. And then we had a conference call. And, I've got our new production assistant, Jack Gervais, here. He just started today, so it's kind of like trial by fire because Jack walked in and had to help us get set up for this first StreamYard. So it's never a dull moment in this career. And to be honest, like I can't imagine anything else. I think that I was born for this. I think you were born for this, Greg. And we have such a fantastic team.
Mm.
And, we've all, I hate the word pivoted, but we did pivot during COVID. Like, we didn't miss a beat. I remember being in the office on Monday, March 16th, because COVID really shut the world down on Friday the 13th. It's kind of funny. It was Friday, March 13th of 2020. And then we all showed up at work in person on that Monday, and we decided we got to get out of here. And we closed down, and everybody started working from home, and we made it work. So it's pretty remarkable.
I look back to the 30 years, right? We're talking about 30 years. Who would have ever thought that we'd be doing PR during a pandemic? I mean, that probably wasn't on your list, Nancy.
I didn't even know what the word pandemic. I mean, I've heard of epidemic, but I had to look up. I remember looking up because somebody said to me, on that weekend, "Oh, we're entering a global pandemic." I'm like, I was a little embarrassed. Like, what's the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic? And it's like pandemic is worldwide, like around the world.
The other thing too, I think that was interesting about that is that I remember distinctly when Charlene came into the office, and it was like in the days that COVID was like starting to become a thing, and like we weren't really sure what was going on. And I think it was Charlene, and I think she either said something like, "Oh, I'm starting to get worried because there's like 27 cases in Cumberland County." And of course, that's where she was based out of. And I said, "Yeah, that sounds a lot." And she's like, "Yeah, thanks." And I'm thinking to myself, how far we've come from 27 cases to now. I mean, that's just so amazing that this became such a terrible virus. And I also want to say one of the things too that I learned, today from doing this video shoot and talking with a lot of people is there are so many community heroes we don't know about. I learned today that there were people here in Augusta that were delivering meals literally door to door for 6 days a week to people that could not get out of their homes or couldn't afford food. And there's stories like that all over communities across the entire country. And that's why we're here, Nancy, right? As a PR firm, those stories many of them will never get told,
Right.
And so it's a privilege to be able to be in this role to help people tell their story who in many cases don't understand that this is a huge deal of what you're doing, and we get to tell their story. And that's really cool.
Right, exactly. And the way that public relations has evolved, like now, we are literally we're a content company. We're a media company. So how the lines have blurred between the editorial side and the advertising side and the PR side. And in a lot of ways, there's a lot of crossover now that never existed before. So I would have, if you had told me 5 years ago that I would have my own show at some point, I'd laugh. I'd say, no, I'm in the business of pitching people who have shows. But, the whole premise of the book that I wrote, Grow Your Audience, Grow Your Brand, is all about identifying an audience for your personal brand or whatever brand you're representing, and then telling your story. So just today, we've shared some of our stories. And I do want to say, for those people who have either, lost loved ones during COVID or, had illness that has impacted them permanently, or even illness that has impacted them for any length of time, knock on wood, all of us on our team have stayed healthy. And I feel very grateful for that. So it's been a very hard year for a lot of people. So anyway, well, I want to thank everybody in PR Maven Nation for joining us for this first StreamYard. Tomorrow, I am going to be interviewing Tom Caron, TC, from the Boston Red Sox. I'm very excited about that. I'm boning up on the names of the Red Sox players. But we have a lot to talk about other than the Red Sox players themselves. And so I'm looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to more fun on StreamYard. So thanks to Greg and Emma and Jack, our new production assistant, for helping us get ramped up.
Absolutely. That'll make 2 Portland Pirates broadcasters you've talked to in 2 days, Nancy. There you go.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yes, because Tom did start his career at the Portland Pirates. And did you know that I did shoot video camera for a Portland Pirates hockey game? At one point, way back when I worked for Maine Public Television, they hired me. They were desperate. They needed a camera operator. And I got hired like on a per diem basis to shoot, I think, 2 or 3 games. So
great.
I had to really keep my eye on that puck.
Yeah.
Like Wayne Gretzky, I had to watch where the puck was going because I was following it with the TV camera. I don't think I've ever even told you that, Greg.
Well, I know you haven't. And I think that that's a great way to end the podcast today, because when you look back at your 30 years, it's that can-do attitude, Nancy, that, you know, that spirit, whether it's picking up a camera or going down a whitewater rafting, you're all in. And I think that's why you've been so successful and why the agency's been so successful.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. I can't help myself. Sometimes I probably should say no, but I just can't say no. So
yeah.
Well, this has been great. And I hope that everybody has a great week. And I look forward to seeing you all next week on our next StreamYard. Thanks for listening to this episode of the PR Maven podcast. I invite you to share a review of the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also join the PR Maven Nation on Facebook. It's free to join, and it's a great community of like-minded individuals who are all looking to learn and grow from one another. If you use an Alexa device, use your Alexa app to search the skills and games section to find and enable the PR Maven podcast flash briefing. This will give you access to exclusive content and more PR and marketing advice. Thanks again for listening, and have a great rest of your week, PR Maven Nation.